Hi, I'm George Yancey. Let's shatter some paradigms. And the paradigm I want to shatter today is called anti-racism. Now, a lot of people had not heard about anti-racism, were not concerned about anti-racism until about 2020. Y'all remember that. The second most important event, nothing beat a COVID. We all lived through that. The second most important event, I believe, was the death of George Floyd. That set off a series of protests and sometimes even riots. And in the wake of that, there was a big push for something called anti-racism. You might have heard everything was anti-racist. There's anti-racist organizations, there's anti-racism programs. The two most popular books of that summer was How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi and White Fragility by D'Angelo. Those are the two most important books that, well, I won't say most important, but they're the most popular books. And they set the tone for anti-racism. Now, what is anti-racism? I read the literature on anti-racism, both the pop literature and the academic literature. And so let me boil it down to four major points. And people can argue whether or not this covers everything or whether there should be other points or whether some of them may not apply as much. But four major points that help to set up what can be called anti-racism. And the first point I want to point out is that anti-racism is about being proactive. We don't sit back and wait for things to happen. We go and we take care of business. We seek out where racism is impacting us and we try to eradicate racism. So it's a very proactive approach. Anti-racists argue that we can't sit back and do nothing. Second, that racism is prevalent throughout the whole society. It's not just about a person who does not like a black person or a Hispanic person. It's not just about something that happens in the economic system. No, racism is everywhere, in our educational system, in our government system, in our military, everywhere there's racism. It's not just personal, it's also institutional, it's also structural. Racism is everywhere. That's second main point. Third point, the role of whites in anti-racism is to do what people of color want them to do. Now, some people may push back on that. No, that's not what we're saying. I just say you read the literature. Read the literature on anti-racism. It becomes clear, as D'Angelo would say, what whites should do is listen to people of color and try to do better. She says this in her book. This same attitude comes out in a lot of the other anti-racist literature. The role of whites is to do what people of color want them to do. Fourth point, anti-racism is about societal change, changing the entire society. We live in a racist society. You may have heard some of them say we live in a white supremacist society. So we can't just tinker around the edges. We must overhaul this society. Anti-racism is not a reformative movement, it's a revolutionary movement. So those are the four major points of anti-racism. Okay, has it been effective? Well, research suggests no, it's not been effective. For example, one thing we know is diversity programs do not tend to have long-term effects. They may change things in the short term, but they don't tend to create long-term prejudice reduction. One can think of it this way. If you become inspired to do something, you may be inspired for a little while, but then you lose momentum. Your kids may come home from Bible camp, all inspired to be obedient and do a good thing, and then 2 months from now, they're back to doing what they were doing. That's kind of how the programs impact people. Now, that may not be bad by itself, but another point that we have to recognize is that these diversity programs often cause resentment and a backlash against people of color. So it's not just that they don't, work, they can actually do harm. In fact, one point is that if you focus in, this is what research says, if you focus in on privilege, What you do is you create less sympathy for marginalized whites without increasing the sympathy for marginalized African Americans. So whites who are on drugs or are homeless, we have less sympathy for them. This means we've reduced overall the level of sympathy we have for marginalized people, because we don't increase it for people of color, we decrease it for whites. Then I really want to focus in on a particular study by Dobbins and Calvage. It's really interesting because they wanted to know how companies could increase the number of minorities who are managers. So they went to a lot of mid-sized companies, mid-sized and large companies. They asked them, how are you creating the number of managers who are people of color? And then they came back 5 years later to see what worked. What largely did not work was anti-racism. Mandatory diversity programs did not work. Having what we call job tests so that people couldn't hire their own friends who happened to be white but had to put everyone through a job test, that didn't work. Grievance committees did not work. The methods of anti-racism did not increase people of color in those companies. So by and large, anti-racism, while it may come from a good place, a desire for justice, we're not reducing prejudice, we're creating backlash, we're not increasing the managers of color hired by companies. Anti-racism doesn't work. And then we now move up to, I'm doing this video in 2025. And what we've seen is a backlash against anti-racism. I believe in part because it's not been very effective. But now, in light of the Trump administration, we're seeing people, they're attacking what's called DEI, which is diversity, equity, and equality. They're attacking that, but they're also attacking anti-racism. The notion of doing these diversity programs, the notion of efforts in order to remedy historical and institutional racism by paying attention to race. They're attacking that. And companies, all the companies, not all, but many of the companies that were so anti-racist in 2020 have retrenched in 2025, which was an indication that they never really truly believed in it in the first place. If they truly believed in it, they'd still be there. You can put social pressure to make people anti-racist, but that does not necessarily change who they are. And they still are not necessarily going to be willing to fight for racial justice. There's got to be a better way. I think the problem with anti-racism is that third point. If the role of whites is to do what people of color want them to do, you're going to build resentment. And one thing my experience has taught me is that people do not do well getting everything they want from other people. In an attempt to give people of color everything they want from whites, I think that has led to a sabotage of anti-racism. Anyways, there's got to be a better way. And I do think there's a better way. I think there's a Christian way. And I talk about it in other videos. Does this shatter your paradigm? Had you come in thinking anti-racism is the program? Have you seen my other videos showing the problems of institutional racism and therefore it has to be anti-racism? But it's not. There are better ways. And we're going to dive into that in some of my other videos. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you're with me this far, then please consider subscribing, liking, commenting. You know, that's the lifeblood of small-time content providers like me. Please consider doing that. Asking friends, come and check it out. Pass this video around. I welcome that. Thank you, and come back again where we can shatter some more paradigms.